The world believed Malcolm King had married for revenge. They were wrong about only one thing. The night that was supposed to destroy one life would become the beginning of saving two. Before sunrise painted the skyline of Chicago in pale gold, every newspaper had already chosen its headline. The mafia boss had finally taken his revenge. Some claimed it was justice. Others called it cruelty wrapped in a wedding tuxedo. No one questioned the bride. No one wondered whether she had ever been given a choice. The black Rolls-Royce glided through the iron gates of the King estate, its polished surface reflecting rows of marble pillars and towering oak trees that lined the private road like silent judges. Beyond them stood the mansion itself, a fortress of stone and glass overlooking the city Malcolm ruled from the shadows. Every window glowed with warm light, yet nothing about the house felt welcoming. Inside the grand entrance, dozens of men dressed in tailored black suits stood perfectly still. Veteran capos, trusted advisors, and loyal bodyguards watched without speaking as the car came to a stop. The silence carried more weight than applause ever could. The chauffeur opened the rear door. Amara Brooks stepped out slowly. Her ivory wedding gown flowed softly against the polished driveway, the delicate fabric catching the evening breeze. A thin lace veil framed her gentle face, but it could not conceal the uncertainty resting quietly inside her dark brown eyes. She looked nothing like a victorious bride. She looked like someone walking toward a sentence she had already accepted. Whispers drifted through the gathered men. So that's her. The daughter of the family that ruined everything. He didn't marry her. He claimed her. Amara heard every word. She never looked toward the voices. Instead, she lifted her chin just enough to continue walking. Years of surviving had taught her something powerful. Sometimes dignity was the only thing no one could steal. At the top of the marble staircase stood Malcolm King. Tall, immovable. His charcoal suit fit him with effortless precision, every line as disciplined as the expression on his face. His dark eyes remained fixed on the city beyond the estate instead of the woman approaching him. To everyone watching, he appeared carved from stone. Only Malcolm knew how carefully he had built those walls around himself. Months earlier, someone had handed him a folder thick with photographs, financial records, and sworn testimonies. Every page pointed toward one family, the Brooks family. Every sleepless night, every betrayal, every funeral, every unanswered question. According to the evidence, their greed had destroyed someone Malcolm had once loved beyond words. Revenge had become the only language his grief could still understand. Marrying Amara had never been about love. It had been the final move on a carefully planned chessboard. A punishment that would last longer than any bullet. The officiant quietly announced that the ceremony was complete. No celebration followed. No music. No laughter. Only signatures. Only witnesses. Only silence. Malcolm finally turned toward his new wife. Their eyes met for the first time that evening. Amara expected hatred. Instead, she found something colder. Indifference. As though she were not a woman standing before him, but another unfinished task waiting on tomorrow's schedule. "Your room has been prepared," Malcolm said evenly. His voice carried neither anger nor kindness, only distance. "You'll have everything you need." Amara nodded once. "Thank you." Those two words sounded almost out of place inside the enormous hall. Neither of them spoke again. House staff quietly guided Amara through endless hallways decorated with priceless paintings and towering crystal chandeliers. Every polished floor reflected her white dress like a ghost wandering through someone else's life. She noticed portraits of Malcolm's family lining the walls. Strong faces, proud eyes, smiles that seemed to disappear in the newer photographs. She wondered how much loss could hide behind wealth. Outside one of the upstairs windows, rain began falling against the glass. Downstairs, Malcolm remained alone in the entrance hall long after everyone else had left. Vincent Ross approached cautiously. "You finally have your revenge." Malcolm continued staring into the rain. "So, everyone believes." Vincent hesitated. "You don't sound satisfied." For several long seconds, Malcolm said nothing. Then he slipped a sealed envelope from inside his jacket and looked at the name written across the front. Amara Brooks. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. If the truth inside this envelope is real, he murmured quietly, then tonight changes everything. Thunder rolled across the dark sky. Upstairs, Amara slowly closed the bedroom door behind her, completely unaware that the life she feared had not yet begun. And neither had the truth Malcolm believed he already knew. Some prisons are built with steel bars. Others are built with silence, where every closed door reminds you that freedom was never yours to begin with. The bedroom assigned to Amara Brooks was larger than the apartment she had rented for the past 6 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering skyline of Chicago. Crystal lamps cast a warm amber glow across polished walnut furniture, while a marble fireplace crackled softly against the rhythm of rain tapping the glass. Everything inside the room spoke of unimaginable wealth. Nothing inside it felt like home. Amara stood motionless near the window, still wearing her wedding gown. She had not touched the untouched dinner resting beneath a silver cover. She had not unpacked the single suitcase that sat quietly beside the bed. She simply watched raindrops race each other down the glass. It reminded her that every storm eventually reached the ground. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. The door opened slowly. An elderly housekeeper stepped inside carrying a tray with warm tea. "My name is Mrs. Evelyn," she said with a kind smile. "I've worked here for 23 years. Amara returned a polite smile. "Thank you." Mrs. Evelyn hesitated before placing the tray on the table. "Mr. King doesn't usually invite anyone into this house." "I wasn't invited." The older woman's eyes softened. "No, you weren't." For a brief moment, neither woman spoke. Mrs. Evelyn glanced toward the wedding dress. "You must be tired." Amara lowered her eyes. "I'm used to difficult days." The answer lingered heavily in the room. "Mrs." Evelyn nodded as though she understood far more than Amara had intended to reveal. "If you need anything tonight." She paused. "Just ring the bell." After the door closed again, silence reclaimed the bedroom. Amara slowly removed her veil and placed it carefully beside the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her. Beautiful makeup, elegant hairstyle, pearl earrings. Every detail looked perfect. Only she knew perfection could hide exhaustion. She reached toward the zipper behind her gown. Her fingers stopped halfway. Not yet. Instead, she wrapped both arms around herself as though trying to keep invisible memories from escaping. Downstairs, Malcolm King sat alone inside his private study. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and old leather. Bookshelves climbed toward the ceiling. Family photographs rested inside silver frames. One frame lay face down. Malcolm never turned it upright. Vincent Ross entered without needing permission. "The guests have all left." Malcolm gave a slight nod. "And her. She hasn't asked for anything." Silence. Vincent studied his friend carefully. "I've known you almost 20 years. You usually celebrate after winning." Malcolm poured himself a glass of whiskey. "I didn't win. You married the woman connected to the people who destroyed your family. I married their name." His voice remained calm. "Not the woman." Vincent leaned against the desk. "The investigation is finished." "Is it?" Malcolm opened the sealed envelope he had carried since the ceremony. Inside rested several photographs, medical records, legal documents, statements from social workers. He slowly turned the first page. His expression remained unreadable. The second page caused the muscles in his jaw to tighten. The third page made him stop breathing for a fraction of a second. Vincent frowned. "What is it?" Malcolm closed the folder immediately. "Nothing." It was a lie. The name repeated throughout every document wasn't Malcolm's enemy. It was Amara Brooks. Again, and again. Victim, protected witness, emergency treatment, missing records, years of unexplained hospital visits. The information refused to fit the story Malcolm had believed for months. He stared into the fireplace. Somewhere deep inside him, certainty developed its first crack. Meanwhile, upstairs, Amara finally gathered enough courage to remove the wedding gown. The zipper slid downward. The delicate fabric slipped quietly onto the floor. She stood before the mirror wearing only a simple satin slip. For a long moment she refused to look at herself. Eventually, she raised her eyes. Faint scars traced across one shoulder. Others disappeared beneath the fabric. Old, healed, silent. She instinctively reached for a soft robe hanging nearby, covering herself almost immediately, as though hiding from memories instead of mirrors. A quiet knock echoed once more. She froze. "It's Malcolm." His voice remained composed from the other side of the door. "We need to talk." Amara's heartbeat quickened. She tied the robe tighter around herself. For several long seconds, she simply stared at the handle. Outside the room, Malcolm stood perfectly still, the sealed folder resting beneath his arm. For the first time in years, the man who feared no rival found himself hesitating before opening a single door, because he no longer knew whether the woman inside was the enemy he had married, or the first victim he had completely failed to see. Sometimes the truth does not arrive with a confession. Sometimes it waits quietly behind a single door, asking only whether someone has the courage to open it. Malcolm King rested one hand against the polished oak door. He had faced federal prosecutors without blinking. He had negotiated peace between rival syndicates with a loaded pistol lying openly on the table. He had buried friends without shedding a tear. Yet a simple wooden door seemed heavier than all of those memories combined. Inside, Amara Brooks tightened the belt of her robe one final time before turning the handle. The door opened only a few inches. She looked at him cautiously. "You wanted to talk." Malcolm's eyes met hers, calm but unreadable. "May I come in?" She stepped aside without answering. The bedroom remained exactly as he had left it. The untouched dinner, the packed suitcase, the rain still whispering against the windows. Everything suggested someone preparing to leave rather than beginning a marriage. Malcolm walked toward the fireplace, keeping a respectful distance between them. For several moments, only the sound of burning would fill the room. Finally, he placed the sealed folder on the coffee table. "Who are you, Amara?" She looked down at the envelope. "I thought you already decided." "I decided based on information. And now, I'm not sure." She slowly sat in one of the chairs near the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. No anger, no pleading. Only exhaustion. "You married me because of my last name." Malcolm remained silent. "I guessed that before the ceremony." His gaze shifted toward her. "You weren't surprised." "No. You still came." "I did." "Why?" A faint smile appeared on her lips. Not one of happiness. One born from accepting difficult truths long ago. "Because running has never changed my life." The answer lingered between them. Malcolm studied her face. There was no calculation behind her eyes. No fear of losing wealth. No attempt to manipulate him. Only quiet honesty. He opened the folder. "I've spent months believing your family destroyed mine. My family destroyed itself long before you arrived. You expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect anything." She looked toward the rain outside. "My father died when I was 11. My mother remarried." Her voice remained steady. "After that." She stopped. The sentence dissolved into silence. Malcolm waited. He had interrogated countless people over the years. He knew pressure often produced lies. Silence sometimes invited truth. After several long breaths, Amara continued. "My stepfather liked closed doors." The room became impossibly still. He liked making sure no one could hear. Malcolm's fingers tightened around the folder. "He always apologized afterward." Another pause. "He always promised it would never happen again." The fire crackled softly. "He never kept that promise." Malcolm looked at the medical records again. Emergency room, broken ribs, deep lacerations, repeated admissions, years apart. Suddenly every page carried a face. Not an accusation. Her face. "I reported him once," Amara whispered. "They sent me back. I reported him again. They said there wasn't enough evidence. The third time, she lowered her eyes. I stopped believing anyone would come. Malcolm had expected tears. None appeared. The absence of them disturbed him far more. People cried when wounds were fresh. Only those hurt for years learned to speak without emotion. You protected someone. She nodded. My little sister. I made sure he chose me instead. The words landed with unbearable weight. Malcolm felt something unfamiliar settle inside his chest. It wasn't guilt. Not yet. It was the terrifying possibility that every decision he had made had been aimed at the wrong person. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. The scars. Instinctively, Amara pulled the robe tighter around herself. They're old. I wasn't asking to see them. She looked up, surprised. I was asking if they still hurt. For the first time that evening, her composure faltered. Her lips parted slightly. No one had ever asked that question. Not doctors. Not lawyers. Not relatives. Not even herself. They don't hurt every day, she answered quietly. Only when I remember. The confession echoed through the room. Malcolm slowly closed the folder. Outside, thunder rolled above the city. Inside, another storm had already begun. He realized revenge had always felt simple because hatred required only one version of the story. Truth demanded many. As Malcolm rose to leave, his eyes caught something lying beside the bed. A small framed photograph. Two young girls smiling beneath the summer sun. One was unmistakably Amara. The other could not have been older than 8. The frame was cracked, carefully repaired with transparent tape. She had carried it through every chapter of her life. Malcolm stopped at the doorway. Without turning around, he spoke quietly. I don't know what happened to your family. He paused. But I intend to find out. The door closed behind him. Amara remained seated in silence, unaware that the man who had entered her room believing he had married his enemy had just walked out questioning every act of revenge that had brought them together. A lie can survive for years, without being questioned. But once the first crack appears, every answer begins demanding another question. Malcolm King did not sleep. As dawn slowly pushed away the night's rain, he stood alone inside the private archive beneath his estate. The underground room held decades of confidential files collected from judges, detectives, politicians, accountants, and men who preferred selling secrets over keeping them. Nothing entered these shelves without being verified. Nothing left without Malcolm's permission. He placed Amara's medical records beside another thick folder stamped with a familiar name. Brooks, the family he had sworn to destroy. For months, he had accepted one version of history. Richard Brooks had laundered money through Malcolm's late father's business. When federal investigators closed in, Richard disappeared, leaving Malcolm's family to absorb the consequences. His younger brother had died during the violent power struggle that followed. His mother never recovered from the grief. Revenge had felt logical, necessary, clean. But the documents before him no longer fit that story. Find everything again. Vincent looked up from the opposite side of the table. We already searched. I said again. You think someone manipulated the files? I think someone wanted me to hate the wrong person. The room fell silent. Vincent had served Malcolm for nearly 20 years. He recognized that tone. It wasn't uncertainty anymore. It was instinct. The instinct that had kept Malcolm alive through countless betrayals. Within hours, investigators scattered across the city. Old police reports resurfaced. Hospital archives reopened. Financial transactions were traced backward instead of forward. This time, Malcolm wasn't searching for evidence against Amara. He was searching for evidence that had been deliberately hidden. Meanwhile, upstairs, Amara wandered quietly through the mansion's enormous library. Rows of leather-bound books climbed toward the ceiling. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, covering the wooden floor with patches of blue and crimson. She ran her fingertips gently across worn book spines. Books had always been her safest hiding place. Stories never asked where bruises came from. Mrs. Evelyn entered carrying fresh flowers. I thought you might like these. They're beautiful. They belonged to Mrs. King. Amara looked at the white lilies. Malcolm's mother? The older woman nodded. She loved flowers that bloomed quietly. After arranging the vase, Mrs. Evelyn hesitated. I've never seen Mr. King reopen the archive after a wedding. Amara frowned slightly. What archive? Mrs. Evelyn smiled politely. I've already said too much. She left before another word could be asked. Amara watched the door close. Something had changed overnight. She could feel it. Not in Malcolm's behavior, in the atmosphere itself. The mansion no longer felt like a prison preparing for punishment. It felt like a house waiting for an answer. Late that afternoon, Malcolm received a phone call from one of his investigators. We found something. Talk. There was another Brooks. Malcolm's expression hardened. What do you mean? Richard Brooks had a younger brother, Darren Brooks. He disappeared 18 years ago. So? He wasn't missing. He changed his identity. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. And he controlled every financial account connected to the laundering operation. The investigator paused. Richard Brooks took the blame. Malcolm remained perfectly still. What about Amara? Another pause. She was 16 when federal agents raided the house. She wasn't living there. She had already been placed in protective custody after reporting domestic abuse. The words echoed through Malcolm's office. Protective custody. The dates matched every hospital record, every missing document, every unexplained gap. His revenge had never been aimed at the guilty. He closed his eyes briefly. For the first time since his brother's funeral, Malcolm questioned his own judgment more than anyone else's. That evening, he returned home earlier than usual. He found Amara sitting alone in the greenhouse behind the estate. Golden sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling, illuminating hundreds of orchids and white roses. She was carefully watering a single struggling plant. You chose the weakest one. She looked over her shoulder. It still has roots. Malcolm stepped closer. Most people would throw it away. Most people don't wait long enough. Her answer settled between them with unexpected weight. He watched her straighten one broken stem using nothing more than a thin ribbon. Gentle, patient, deliberate. The woman before him looked nothing like the enemy he had imagined for months. Without realizing it, Malcolm asked the question that had quietly haunted him all day. If someone gave you the chance to start over? Amara smiled sadly without looking at him. I wouldn't ask for a different life. He frowned. You wouldn't? No. She carefully brushed soil from her hands. I would only ask that the people I love never have to live through the one I survived. Malcolm lowered his gaze. For years he had believed revenge honored the dead. Standing inside the quiet greenhouse, surrounded by fragile flowers fighting toward the light, he suddenly wondered if revenge had only created another victim. Hidden inside his jacket rested a new file delivered minutes earlier. Across its cover was a name he had never seen before, Darren Brooks. And Malcolm understood with chilling certainty. The man responsible for destroying both of their lives was still alive. The most dangerous monsters are not the ones hiding in darkness. They are the ones who spend years convincing the world they never existed. Malcolm King had built his empire on one simple rule: never hunt without proof. For the first time in his life, he realized he had broken his own rule. The name Darren Brooks echoed through every report his investigators uncovered that morning. No photographs, no current address, no driver's license, only fragments. A man who had erased himself so completely that even government databases disagreed about whether he was alive. Malcolm closed the final folder and looked toward Vincent. I want him. Vincent nodded. We'll find him. No. Malcolm's voice turned colder. I didn't say find him. He slowly buttoned his suit jacket. I said I want him. No further explanation was necessary. Within minutes, dozens of trusted operatives moved across Chicago. Some visited abandoned businesses, once owned by the Brooks family. Others questioned retired detectives. Several tracked old financial accounts that had suddenly become active again after years of silence. Every clue pointed in one direction. Someone had spent nearly 2 decades cleaning Darren Brooks' past. Someone powerful. Meanwhile, Amara spent the afternoon helping Mrs. Evelyn prepare lunch for the household staff. The elderly housekeeper protested several times. "You don't have to do this." "I know." "Then why?" Amara smiled gently while slicing fresh vegetables. "Keeping my hands busy keeps my mind quiet." Mrs. Evelyn watched her for a moment. "Most people who grow up with kindness never learn that." Amara paused briefly. "I didn't." The kitchen fell into comfortable silence. One by one, the cooks began smiling at the young woman they had expected to fear. She thanked everyone. She listened more than she spoke. She remembered every name after hearing it only once. Without realizing it, she was slowly changing the atmosphere inside the mansion. Not through authority, through kindness. Late that evening, Malcolm entered the dining room. The staff immediately stepped aside. He noticed something unusual. People were laughing. Quietly, respectfully, but laughing. That almost never happened. Mrs. Evelyn placed dinner on the table. Mrs. King prepared the soup. Malcolm looked toward Amara. "You cooked." She nodded. It was easier than sitting alone. He tasted a spoonful. Simple ingredients. Nothing extravagant. Yet something about it reminded him of dinners his mother had cooked before violence had entered their lives. He placed the spoon down carefully. "It's good." Amara blinked. For a man known for speaking as little as possible, those 2 words sounded unexpectedly sincere. She answered with a soft smile. "I'm glad." The meal continued mostly in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Careful silence. Like 2 strangers unknowingly standing on opposite sides of a bridge neither had crossed yet. Halfway through dinner, Malcolm's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. "Vincent. Urgent." He answered immediately. "What is it?" "We found Darren." Malcolm stood so abruptly that his chair slid backward across the marble floor. "Where?" "Not where." Vincent's breathing sounded uneven. "Who?" Pause followed. Then came the sentence Malcolm never expected to hear. "Darren Brooks has been working under another identity for the last 15 years. Malcolm waited. "He isn't hiding from the law. He's protected by one of the largest private security corporations in the country." Malcolm's expression darkened. "Who owns it?" Vincent answered quietly. "Senator William Carter." The room suddenly felt colder. A senator. Federal protection. Political influence. This was no longer a family tragedy. It was a conspiracy. Malcolm ended the call without another word. He turned toward the window overlooking the city. Chicago shimmered beneath the night sky, unaware that another invisible war had just begun. Behind him, Amara remained seated. She had heard only fragments. Enough to recognize one name. Darren. Her face slowly lost its color. The fork slipped from her fingers onto the china plate. The sharp sound echoed through the dining room. Malcolm turned immediately. "You know that name." It wasn't a question. Amara's breathing became shallow. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. For several seconds she tried to speak, but no words came. Finally, barely above a whisper, she said the one sentence she had buried inside herself for nearly 20 years. "He promised." Her voice cracked. "That if I ever told anyone he survived." Tears finally appeared in her eyes for the first time since Malcolm had met her. "He would come back." The room fell completely silent. Malcolm crossed the distance between them without hesitation. Not as a husband seeking affection. Not as a mafia boss demanding answers. But as a man who finally understood the depth of another person's fear. He stopped beside her chair. His voice remained calm, steady, almost protective. "Listen to me, Amara." She slowly lifted her tear-filled eyes. "He isn't coming back for you." Malcolm's gaze hardened like polished steel. "Because before he reaches this house, he'll have to come through me. The safest place in the world is not behind locked doors. It is beside someone who has finally decided that your pain is worth protecting." For the first time since their wedding, Malcolm King ordered extra security not around his empire, but around one woman. By sunrise, discreet guards had been positioned throughout the estate. Surveillance systems were upgraded. Every vehicle entering the property was inspected twice. New cameras appeared almost invisibly among the trees surrounding the mansion. No one was told why. Only Malcolm and Vincent knew the truth. Darren Brooks had vanished once before. Malcolm had no intention of allowing him another opportunity. Standing inside the security command room, Vincent watched dozens of live camera feeds. You've protected politicians. You've protected judges. You've protected witnesses. He turned toward Malcolm. I've never seen you protect someone like this. Malcolm kept his eyes on the monitors. Neither have I. Across one screen, Amara could be seen walking slowly through the estate gardens with Mrs. Evelyn. She looked peaceful, unaware that an invisible shield now surrounded every step she took. Malcolm watched quietly, not because he doubted her, because he doubted the man hunting her. Meanwhile, Amara paused beside a small pond where white lilies floated across the water. Mrs. Evelyn smiled. You seem calmer today. I slept. You haven't been sleeping? Amara shook her head gently. Not for years. What changed? Amara looked toward the distant mansion. I don't know. She searched for the right words. For the first time. I don't feel like I'm waiting for someone to break the door. Mrs. Evelyn followed her gaze. Sometimes healing began long before love. Sometimes it began the moment fear finally loosened its grip. Elsewhere in Chicago, Vincent's investigation continued. An old accountant agreed to speak, only after receiving protection. Inside a forgotten warehouse office, the elderly man slid a dusty ledger across the table. I kept copies. Vincent opened the worn book. Every payment, every transfer, every signature. One name appeared repeatedly beside hidden transactions. Senator William Carter. Another appeared beside cash withdrawals. Darren Brooks. The accountant lowered his voice. Darren wasn't hiding. He was being rewarded. Vincent looked up sharply. For what? The old man swallowed hard. For taking the blame when someone more important needed to disappear. Hours later, Malcolm studied the ledger in silence. Each page confirmed the impossible. Richard Brooks had been sacrificed. Amara's family had been destroyed. His own family had been manipulated. Different victims. The same architect. Malcolm slowly removed an old photograph from his desk drawer. It showed his younger brother smiling beside their mother years before violence entered their lives. I promised I'd avenge you. His voice was almost inaudible. I was chasing the wrong ghost. For the first time in years, he placed the photograph upright instead of hiding it away. That evening, rain returned. Heavy. Relentless. A sudden power surge briefly dimmed the lights throughout the estate. Within seconds, backup generators restored everything. Security radios crackled simultaneously. Movement at the east perimeter. Possible intruder. Malcolm was already moving before the sentence ended. His bodyguards followed without hesitation. Inside the mansion, Amara heard hurried footsteps echoing through the hallways. Her breathing immediately changed. Old memories flooded back. Doors opening. Heavy footsteps. Voices she could never escape. She instinctively backed toward the corner of her bedroom. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. The lights flickered once more. A gentle knock came at the door. Not loud. Not demanding. Just one calm knock. It's Malcolm. His voice remained steady. May I come in? The question surprised her. No man from her past had ever asked permission. She slowly opened the door. Malcolm entered alone. No guards. No weapons in his hands. Only concern. I wanted you to hear it from me. She looked at him silently. There was a security alert. His tone remained calm. It was a false alarm. She nodded, but her shaking hadn't stopped. Malcolm noticed immediately. Without thinking, he removed his tailored suit jacket and draped it gently across her shoulders. You don't have to be afraid. His voice carried none of the authority that ruled Chicago's underworld. only quiet reassurance. Amara closed her eyes for a moment. The jacket was still warm. It smelled faintly of cedarwood and rain. Not once in her life had someone's touch made her feel safer instead of smaller. She whispered so softly that only Malcolm could hear. "I don't know how to trust." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You don't have to trust me today." He offered the smallest smile she had ever seen on his face. "Just let me earn it." Outside, thunder rolled above the estate. Inside, something far more powerful had begun. Not love, not yet, but the fragile beginning of a promise. That neither of them would have to face the darkness alone again. Love rarely arrives with grand declarations. More often, it appears quietly in the ordinary moments when someone chooses your peace over their own pride. The mansion no longer felt unfamiliar. Not because its marble halls had changed, because the silence inside them had. Days passed without fear knocking on Amara's bedroom door. Without shouting. Without broken glass. Without footsteps that made her heart race. For the first time in nearly 20 years, she began waking before sunrise not from nightmares, but from birdsong drifting through the estate gardens. One quiet morning, Malcolm found her sitting alone in the greenhouse. Morning light spilled through the glass ceiling, wrapping every flower in shades of gold. She was reading a worn paperback novel, her cup of tea slowly cooling beside her. "You come here every morning." She looked up and smiled. "It reminds me that broken things still grow." Malcolm glanced toward the orchids she had rescued days earlier. New green leaves had begun pushing through the damaged stems. They survived. They wanted to. She closed the book gently. They only needed time. The words settled somewhere deep inside him. Perhaps people were no different. Over the following weeks, the estate slowly transformed. The kitchen staff laughed more often. Mrs. Evelyn began humming while arranging flowers. Even the security guards noticed that their employer no longer walked through the halls with the same relentless tension. Malcolm still worked long hours. He still commanded one of Chicago's most feared criminal organizations. But every evening, regardless of how late he returned, he paused outside the greenhouse. Sometimes Amara was reading. Sometimes she painted. Sometimes she simply watched the rain. Neither of them spoke much. Neither needed to. Comfort slowly replaced caution. One afternoon, Malcolm arrived carrying a small wooden box. "I found something." Amara looked up curiously. "What is it?" "It belonged to my mother." He placed the box on the table. Inside rested dozens of flower seeds carefully labeled in faded handwriting. White lilies, lavender, jasmine, bluebells. My mother believed every garden deserved another spring. Amara touched one of the envelopes carefully, almost afraid it might disappear. "You trusted me with this?" Malcolm nodded. "I do." She looked at him quietly. No one had trusted her with something precious in a very long time. That evening they planted the seeds together beneath the fading sunlight. Neither noticed how naturally they worked side by side. He dug the soil. She placed each seed gently into the earth. He covered them. She watered them. No instructions. No arguments. Only quiet understanding. Mrs. Evelyn watched from the kitchen window. A warm smile crossed her face. They look like a real family. Weeks earlier, such a thought would have seemed impossible. Now it felt inevitable. Later that night, Malcolm found Amara standing on the mansion's balcony beneath a sky filled with stars. "You couldn't sleep?" She shook her head. "Not because I'm afraid. Because I kept wondering what peace feels like." Malcolm stepped beside her. "What did you decide?" She looked toward the horizon where the city lights shimmered against the darkness. "I think peace isn't the absence of pain." She smiled softly. "I think it's the absence of expecting pain." Malcolm turned toward her. Moonlight illuminated her face. For the first time since their wedding, he no longer saw a woman carrying someone else's surname. He saw Amara. Only Amara. Without thinking, he reached toward her hand. Not to claim it, simply to ask. She noticed the hesitation. Instead of speaking, she slowly placed her hand in his, their fingers intertwined naturally. No fear, no obligation, No contract. Only choice. The silence between them carried more meaning than any confession. Across the garden, the first tiny sprout broke through the soil where they had planted the lilies together. Neither of them saw it, but Mrs. Evelyn did. She whispered to herself with tears quietly gathering in her eyes. Some flowers bloom after the hardest winters. At that same moment, miles away in a private office overlooking downtown Chicago, Senator William Carter closed a confidential file bearing Malcolm King's name. Across the desk sat Darren Brooks. Older, colder, very much alive. Darren slid a recent photograph across the table. It showed Malcolm and Amara standing together in the greenhouse. They've stopped fearing each other. Senator Carter studied the image in silence. That makes them dangerous. Darren's expression hardened. Then it's time we remind them that some ghosts never stop hunting. A family is not created by blood, wealth, or a wedding ceremony. It is built one quiet act of protection at a time, until fear no longer feels like home. Autumn arrived gently over the King estate. The gardens Malcolm and Amara had planted together were beginning to bloom. The white lilies had opened first, then the lavender. Finally, tiny bluebells stretched toward the morning sun, as though the earth itself had decided healing deserved a season of its own. Mrs. Evelyn smiled every time she walked past them. They're blooming earlier than expected. Amara knelt beside one flower bed, brushing away fallen leaves. Maybe they were waiting for someone to believe they could. Malcolm watched her from the stone pathway. He no longer stood at a distance. Without thinking, he joined her on one knee, carefully pulling weeds from the soil beside her. Years ago, newspapers had called Malcolm King the most feared man in Chicago. If any of them had seen him now, silently dirtying an expensive suit to save a flower, they would never have believed it. Neither of them noticed Mrs. Evelyn quietly wiping away tears before returning inside. The mansion had changed, not because its walls were different, because laughter now echoed through rooms once ruled by silence. The kitchen staff prepared meals together every evening. Security guards greeted Amara with genuine smiles. She remembered every birthday, every child's name, every family story. Without asking for authority, she had become the quiet heart of the household. One afternoon, Malcolm returned from a meeting carrying several shopping bags. Amara looked at them curiously. "I didn't order anything. They're not for you." She raised an eyebrow. "They're for the staff." Inside were warm coats, children's school supplies, medicine for an elderly gardener's wife, and books requested by one of the young security officers studying at night. Amara looked at him with quiet surprise. "You remembered." Malcolm shrugged almost awkwardly. "You remembered first." Months earlier, he would never have noticed those conversations. Now he found himself paying attention to the people she cared about, because somehow, they had quietly become his people too. That evening the entire household gathered for dinner. Not in separate kitchens. Not divided by rank. One long table. One shared meal. Mrs. Evelyn stood to offer a toast. "I've worked in this house for 38 years. Everyone fell silent. I've seen wealth. I've seen violence. I've seen fear." She looked toward Malcolm. "Tonight is the first time." Her eyes shifted to Amara. "I've seen peace." The room remained completely still. Malcolm slowly reached beneath the table. His hand found Amara's. This time, there was no hesitation from either of them. Their fingers fit together naturally, as though they had finally stopped holding on to the past. Later that night, they walked through the gardens beneath strings of soft lights. The air smelled of fresh earth and jasmine. "You know," Malcolm said quietly, "when I married you," Amara smiled faintly. "I know why." "No." He stopped walking. "I thought I did." She turned toward him. "The truth is." He looked down for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "I married revenge." His voice softened. "But somewhere along the way, I found home." The words lingered between them. Amara's eyes glistened. No dramatic speech followed. No impossible promise. She simply rested her forehead gently against his. "I think," she whispered, Home found both of us. For several peaceful seconds, the world disappeared. Only the wind, the flowers, the steady rhythm of two hearts no longer burdened by loneliness. Then Malcolm's phone vibrated. One message. One photograph. His expression changed instantly. Amara noticed. What happened? He silently handed her the phone. The image showed the front gates of the estate, taken only minutes earlier. Standing across the road, partially hidden beneath a black umbrella, was an older man with silver at his temples. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He was looking directly toward the mansion. Toward them. Even from a distance, Amara recognized the face. The color drained from her own. Her breathing stopped. She whispered one name that froze Malcolm's blood. Darren. Before Malcolm could respond, another message appeared beneath the photograph. Contained only one sentence. A sentence sent from an unknown number. A sentence that proved the hunt was over. I've finally come to take back what belongs to me. Justice is never loud enough to erase the past. But sometimes, it is quiet enough to give the future a chance. The front gates of the King estate opened before sunrise. Not for an attack. For a meeting. Malcolm stood alone at the entrance, dressed in a black suit untouched by the morning wind. Behind him, dozens of loyal men waited silently, their weapons lowered but ready. Across the road, Darren Brooks stepped from beneath his umbrella. Time had carved deep lines across his face. But his eyes remained exactly as Amara remembered. Cold, patient, cruel. So, Darren said with a faint smile, the great Malcolm King finally knows the truth. Malcolm's expression never changed. I know enough. You know nothing. Darren laughed softly. You think Richard was innocent? He was. You think your family was betrayed? They were. And you think you can rewrite history? Malcolm took one calm step forward. No, I intend to finish it. The smile slowly disappeared from Darren's face. Inside the mansion, Amara watched from an upstairs window. Her hands trembled, not because Darren had returned, because for the first time in her life, she was no longer facing him alone. At that exact moment, the distant sound of sirens echoed through the morning air. Not one patrol car, dozens. Black SUVs surrounded the estate from every direction. FBI, federal prosecutors, financial crimes investigators. Senator William Carter had been arrested less than an hour earlier. Vincent had delivered every ledger, every recording, every hidden account, and every witness statement collected over the past weeks. The conspiracy had finally collapsed under its own weight. Darren looked around as armed agents approached. You planned this. Malcolm answered quietly. No, you planned it yourself. I only stopped standing in its way. Darren suddenly reached inside his coat. Several weapons were instantly raised. Don't. Amara's voice echoed across the courtyard as she ran toward them. Malcolm instinctively stepped between her and Darren. Without hesitation, without calculation, only protection. Darren slowly removed not a gun, but an old photograph. A faded picture of a frightened teenage Amara standing beside her younger sister. You belong to me. His voice carried years of poison. I made you. For a brief second, the terrified girl Amara had once been almost returned. Then she looked at Malcolm, at Mrs. Evelyn standing behind him, at the staff who had become her family, at the home she had never believed she deserved. She took one slow step forward, then another, until she stood beside Malcolm instead of behind him. Her voice was calm, steady, certain. No. She looked directly into Darren's eyes. You only wounded me. She reached for Malcolm's hand. But they helped me heal. The entire courtyard fell silent. Federal agents moved forward. This time, Darren did not resist. For the first time in decades, he looked smaller than the fear he had created. As handcuffs closed around his wrists, he turned once more toward Amara. She no longer looked away. Neither did Malcolm. The monster who had haunted two families for 20 years was finally taken away. Not by revenge, by truth. Months later, spring returned to the King estate. The gardens overflowed with white lilies. Children from a local shelter laughed across the lawns after Malcolm quietly transformed part of his property into a refuge for survivors of domestic abuse. No reporters were invited. No speeches were given. No statues were built. Only open doors. Inside the greenhouse, Malcolm found Amara tending the very first orchid she had rescued. It had fully bloomed. Without a word, he knelt beside her. His fingers gently traced the old scars that crossed the back of her hand. Scars she had once hidden from the world. He lowered his head and kissed them softly, not because they defined her, but because they reminded him how fiercely she had survived. Tears filled Amara's eyes, not from sorrow, from peace. She rested her forehead against his. Neither of them needed to speak. The flowers around them swayed gently beneath the afternoon light. Outside, laughter echoed through the gardens. Inside, two broken lives had become one unbreakable home. And on that quiet spring afternoon, the world remembered what dignity truly looks like.